What about federal federal locations such as a fish and wildlife refuge or a national park? I know that the U.S. national parks have banned all drones under all conditions. And how likely is that to stick, do you think?
Well, that's going to get a little tougher, I think, because what you're going to find there, and the state of California within the last couple of months they have Assembly Bill 2148, and what they have mandated with it went through the House and Senate, and so by January 1st, 2018, the Department of Fish and Wildlife shall develop regulations governing the launching, landing, or ground-based operations of unmanned aircraft services. And there's a list of there's a group of categories that they want to protect through their regulations. So those regulations haven't been written yet, but at least on their face, they're valid.
Right. Okay.
So these are issues that are going to play out. And it's the protection of wildlife, not interference with migration, breeding, protection of historical and natural resources. Well, in a state and national park, they have a lot of species.
Many,
and they could be endangered, or one bird is going to be migrating this time frame, the months of March and April, and the next one's going to be migrating in November, and the hobbyists are going to have a tough time distinguishing and knowing these things. So I think there's going to be some clashes, certainly, and I think at the end of the day, the parks are going to have areas designated for hobbyists. And I think as you're aware, the park rangers are going to be hiring people to fly drones into areas that are difficult to reach without disturbing the wildlife. So it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be difficult, because on the one hand, they will use drones. And then it will be a bit hypocritical to say, all right, we're banning the use of drones.
Nobody else can.
So I think there will be some time, place, location regulations for people until it becomes unmanageable. And if it becomes unmanageable, the government might get that.
Well, I think it's interesting, because this kind of goes back to some stuff I talked about earlier in this MCLE about the quality of the drones, and the fact that 3 years ago there was basically 2 manufacturers of drones, and if you bought one of those, you had a pretty good idea that if you flew the drone up in the air, it was going to come back to you when you were done flying it. Well, that's no longer the case. You can go to some of the big box stores and you can get a drone for $95, and you get what you pay for. I mean, as I said earlier, you got to spend $400 or $500 on a drone to really get a good quality one. So if we've got the $99 specials, I certainly don't want to be rock climbing on Half Dome and have a $99 special drone trying to photograph me, because it may hit me in the head or it may cut my rope at the same time. So these types of regulations may have to be tied into the FAA's apparent direction with the 107, the Part 107, where you have to have your drone certified, and there may be some requirements as well as the quality of the drone and the quality of the drone pilot.
Right, and certainly, those are issues that are going to remain to be seen. I think that what you'll see is limited areas within parks where drones are permitted. And times of the year, times of the day, operating hours, operating conditions. In other words, you're not going to operate drones in Yosemite when it's snowing. You're not going to operate drones anywhere near El Capitan when there's rock climbers. The public's going to face a lot of these issues, and it's going to be complicated to both write them and enforce them.
Well, let me bring up a situation that happened to me about 2 weeks ago, and this is going to be an interesting type of situation I think is going to recur. I was out flying my drone, and I made a YouTube video, and I put it up, And it turns out that I had been flying in or near a national wildlife refuge, and so I got the National Wildlife Refuge sent me a little YouTube link saying, hey, we've banned drones in our National Wildlife Refuge. So I wrote him back and I said, okay, well, I want to comply with the law. Just offhand, though, you also allow duck hunting and a lot of other hunting in your wildlife refuge. So the rationale you advanced to me that you were afraid I was going to harass the wildlife with was actually this exact drone. If I'm a duck, I think I'd rather have that drone flying around me and get my head shot off with a shotgun. So, go ahead, yeah.
Well, right. So the issue is they enacted a ban to protect the harassment of wildlife.
Right.
Okay. Well, if you're not harassing wildlife or you're not flying in a manner to harass wildlife, and again, I think it's valid on the face.
Yeah.
But the application is too broad.
I agree. Yeah.
And it's the same thing. And I agree with you. I suppose nothing harasses wildlife like a
shotgun,
like a buckshot, right? Yeah. So, but hunting and fishing are that's not gonna stop.
No, not
but certainly, I don't. How are they going to prevent the photography of wildlife by a drone?
Yeah. To add another level of interest to it, I was actually using my drone to do some, and I never charge for using my drone to photograph environmental projects or anything like that, but I was actually doing some work for the state of California, photographing rivers and things like that, so they could get an idea from a drone's perspective of what the drainage looked like and what the riparian habitat looked like, because they're in the process of doing water sampling to try to make sure that these particular rivers are clean. So at this point, I think we're going to have one agency of the state up against Fish and Wildlife, and that's going to be an interesting one because the state wants me to keep flying. They're saying, please go back, get us more footage, we love it. Can you fly some other areas? And so that's going to be a fun one.
Well, that will be interesting. And then you have issues of, I can think of issues of sort of watchdog groups like the Sierra Club who have, court rulings with respect to the policies and procedures that parks are supposed to follow and mitigation.
Yeah.
And how can you prove compliance, and maybe it's impractical to traipse back to some of these rivers to see if they're clean or not, or to make sure that the mitigation efforts or the eradication of non-native species is really occurring. Well,
sure.
Someone's going to be permitted to fly a drone back there.
Particularly if you're concerned about the water quality, do you really want your scientists wading through the water to count the number of tamarisks, or would you rather fly a drone overhead, download the footage, and count the tamarisks looking at it from the safety of your office on a laptop?
Well, and it's interesting that that we say that because the California legislation doesn't apply to people with commercial licenses.
Yeah.
So long as that person is complying within the terms of the commercial license. So but again, as a hobbyist, if you're not harassing the wildlife, if you're not invading people's campsites, if you're not endangering anybody's life or interfering with safety personnel, it's going to be hard for these places to regulate.
Yeah. So this puts me in the somewhat unique position of perhaps having to tell the state of California that I have to get a commercial license to be outside of their regulations so I can use it for a clearly non-commercial, clearly charitable purpose.
Well, yeah, I don't, and I don't know that they can necessarily make you do that. You're not truly a commercial.
I'm not
a commercial pilot.
So that's going to be off my drone photography, and I never want to.
Well, I think you're going to have to let the state and and the park rangers sort it out.
Yeah, I know. So, what else do you see on the frontier for state versus federal law on this?
Well, there's just going to be more fights over, the delineation between what the FAA is truly, what's within their power,
Right.
and how do the states and local ordinances protect their interests.
Sure.
I think, that's the developing area of the law. These places, the states, the feds, and the municipalities all carving out
their turf. Yeah.
and then it's the enforcement of it.
Sure.
And that's going to, like any regulation where there's federal preemption, you're going to have individual, a case by case basis.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting. One of the issues obviously everybody's concerned about is privacy. Nobody wants your neighbor flying a drone with a camera over your yard.
Just look at the South Park episode where Eric Cartman got his hands on a drone to see the worst case scenario there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, right. But life will imitate art.
Right, yeah,
so that it will be coming to you soon.
Sure.
On a YouTube channel near you, live and in person.
Yeah.
But I think. So cities are reacting to that, banning cameras on drones.
Yeah.
Well, again, people don't have privacy rights out in your parking lot or in a public park, and so I think you can enact an ordinance that says you can't fly drones in a reckless manner or within 10 or 20 feet of another person in a public space, but banning cameras is probably not going to work.
Yeah. I don't think the press would be too keen on that either.
The press will not be keen on it, and it'll be interesting to see if the press they get involved in First Amendment issues quite often, and some of these can involve First Amendment issues and rights to take photographs in public places.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the size of the drone, if you're filming a public event, you want this flying over, you want a helicopter, because you can't fly a helicopter 100 feet over a group of people without them hearing it or really being aware of it. You can fly one of these, no problem, for better or for worse.